You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
You're listening to Mission Log the Orville, an episode-by-episode discussion of the adventures of the crew of the USS Orville. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Mission Log the Orville, the show where we look at every single episode of the Orville and open up that jar of pickles to savor what's inside, looking for meanings, morals, and messages. Except this week. Jessica, what are we doing this week?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's been months since we've done that, so that really just made me chuckle. Like, you know, you hear it ad nauseum.
I didn't say every week. I should say every episode.
That's really cute. This week, we get to talk to somebody who actually was, like, willfully wanting to talk to us. Like, I'd like to be on the show. Brannon Braga, welcome.
Hi. Now, you know what? I found out about you through Seth.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, he listens. Before I think he was even on your show, he listened to your show, and so did I.
Oh, that's great. The way we found out about it is Seth actually shared the YouTube feed on the Roddenberry YouTube channel for a season 2 episode, Lasting Impressions, which is of probably the first 2 seasons. Probably my favorite episode. So once Jessica and I recorded that, we just kind of like put it out there for everybody to see. And Seth shared that on his feed, and the viewership went way up for that. And our producer reached out to Seth to see if he wanted to be on the show, and he said yes. So we had him on. We had a great time. We were supposed to have him for 15 minutes. I think we had him for closer to 40 because he was willing to talk to us that long, and we were willing to keep talking. So it was great.
That's great.
And you, for those of you that don't know, and if you don't know, I'm surprised you're listening or watching this podcast, but Brannon is Star Trek royalty, started his career way back with Next Gen, went on to Voyager.
Way back. Don't make it sound like
Enterprise.
It's that long. It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago.
1990.
Wow. And how'd you get your start on Next Gen?
So I was a student at UC Santa Cruz, and didn't know what I was going to do, and ended up applying for an internship with the Academy of TV Arts and Sciences, which is still there, the internship program. It's a great internship program, and they put on the Emmys every year, but they're also very involved in the TV community. And they have this internship that has an internship in every category, from makeup to wardrobe to script writing. And though I wanted to make movies and TV was crappy,
that was the opinion.
That was the prevailing opinion at that time, and probably was largely true.
For sure.
I applied for the internship and actually didn't get it, and then I got it the next year, the year I was leaving school, and that's how it all started. In June of 1990, Best of Both Worlds Part 1, the famous Borg show, just aired. I just watched it.
Wow.
And walked into Michael Pillar's office that morning, Monday morning, and met him, and he was writing Part 2 of Best of Both Worlds, and he said, "Have any ideas on how to beat the Borg?" And I had no idea how to respond. The only other writer there at the time was Ron Moore. I guess there had been a cleaning of house or something, because it was just us.
Wow.
So a couple of things I want to ask you about.
By the way, it was a much longer answer than you asked for.
No,
that's how I got my start. And then 17 years later, I was still there.
Well, I want to talk more about some of that early stuff. So that internship, that was probably no easy task to get. Are you talking hundreds of applicants, thousands?
I'm sure thousands. You didn't know what show you were going to be on.
So they can place a bunch of people on different things, or
that's right. Well, so the internship program had at that time 26 categories in different fields, from casting, everything. And there was a script writing category, and I wanted to write screenplays. And there were 2 interns that year. One was on a sitcom called Dr. Doctor. That's all I know about it. And all I know is it didn't last more than a season or so. And then there was one on Next Generation. And I knew I was a fan of the Star Trek movies, and with Kirk and the gang, and I had seen the pilot for Next Generation and the first episode or 2, stopped watching because I didn't like it. And then this is what, by the way, this is a real cultural microcosm here. In college at UC Santa Cruz, word on the street was Next Gen was good now.
Sure.
And so, and I had actually watched a couple of episodes because someone had said to watch a couple of episodes. And I'm like, oh, this is very well written. This is a good show. And so when I found out I was going to be on Next Generation, though I hadn't seen more than 4 episodes. I was excited because it was that's word of mouth, right?
Right.
And it was season 3 that it was getting good, and I got there right at the end of season 3.
So that's funny. I watched Encounter at Farpoint the night it premiered. Was impressed by it enough to go back and watch the second episode, which seemed to be a shot-for-shot remake of The Naked Time. It was called The Naked Now. And I thought, why are they even doing this show if they're just going to tell the same stories again? And probably hung in until about as far as Code of Honor. And then it wasn't until the end of season 3, my brother got a hold of me and said, you need to start watching the show again.
God, so that's what's interesting is because that was without Twitter, right? That was without a bunch of people going, I hate this, I love this, because you still want something to spark a cultural fire, and
that's right.
And then that did.
And there's nothing better than being in on the ground floor, which is kind of what Comic-Con's still all about to some degree. Things will be destroyed or anointed there,
right?
And
that's interesting.
From my perspective, having been going there since the 80s as just a fan. Next Gen, I had the same experience you did. Code of Honor, I was out. I'm like, this is bad. And I mean, even as someone who wasn't writing professionally, you could tell it was bad. You may not have been able to articulate why it was bad, but yeah, no Twitter. Just word up, people like literally saying to each other, you should watch this show.
I still think it boils down to that, though, too. Like I might see a bunch of people tweet about The Last of Us, which I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's doing well, and I'm almost more interested to watch it than I was before. I actually have a non sequitur but important question. Was UC Santa Cruz as much of a party school as it is now when you were there?
Was it a party school now?
Yeah. Were you partying there?
No, there was a lot of. I mean, it had a reputation for having a lot of people smoking weed, and it was a hippie school in the 70s. They didn't. When I was there, they still didn't have grades. Grades weren't cool. Teachers would write evaluations, which they never did, because where would they find the time to write hundreds of evaluations? It was. I wasn't. When I went there, I was a couple years older than the other students because I had taken a hiatus from school. So I was pretty focused on getting what I could out of the school. I wasn't interested in partying.
I actually like that because you're like, I have a goal.
I had a goal. I also didn't have any money to buy drugs. So.
Well, that's why you go to the parties, because it's probably getting passed out,
Yes, right, yeah.
But again, I didn't go to college, so I partied in my 30s.
Well, if it's any consolation, I didn't graduate from college, so I don't.
Oh,
heck yeah. That's some street cred right there.
That is. That really is.
It was. It wasn't for a long time. It was, and then it became okay.
100%, right? Like there is some times in my career where I'm like, boy, a degree would have really helped me right now. And then it doesn't, like, that's just more like, oh, I could be an artistic director at a theater if I had a degree, or like certain things that would fill in the gap between other jobs. But I wouldn't trade my street experience versus college, and even all the improv I did. It felt like I was in college because we were partying a lot. But I made connections in a different way.
Absolutely. And, I went to film school. UC Santa Cruz had a very small but excellent film school. Now it's a kind of a large but excellent film school. And then I went right into grad school, essentially, as an intern with Michael Pillar and this show, which was on its feet. And that's where I really learned everything.
So I'm so sorry, Mike. I know you have so many questions, but I'm curious, what do you think had you stand apart for them to choose you for the internship? Were you sending them like portfolio work from the school?
So the internship program required transcripts going, all of your transcripts, all of your college transcripts, a writing sample, an original writing sample, a writing sample from an existing show, and a videotaped interview where they provided the questions.
Love that. Yeah, got it.
And Michael Pillar told me he liked my writing samples. He made a crack about my transcripts that I had gotten in community college in Ohio. I had gotten a D in human sexuality.
Oh, God.
People thought that was the funniest thing you'd ever heard.
Well, yeah, you were getting field experience, probably.
Your transcripts, it's all there for everyone to see. There it is.
That's so funny.
That's awesome. So do you feel like you and Michael connected from the very start? I mean, you walked in, you said, hey, what do you think we should do about this, how to defeat the Borg? Was that, you think that was a brainstorming kind of question? Did you just kind of wanted to...
it was just a funny thing to say.
Yeah. Because I think he was writing it both for if Patrick Stewart returned and if he didn't at that point. Is that correct?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, I think the whole Patrick Stewart thing was a little inflated. That was a great rumor, flying around, and he may have been going through some renegotiations. I can't say for sure, but certainly when I was there was no discussion of Patrick not coming back.
Gotcha.
But he definitely was struggling with how to beat the Borg. I mean, there was, and ultimately, I don't remember exactly how they did it, but it was slightly disappointing, I think. It didn't involve enough space battles, in my opinion.
Yeah, they put them to sleep.
Put them to sleep, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's kind of clever, but where's the shit blowing up?
That's it, man. We got to see. To quote your current partner, Seth MacFarlane, we want to see some explosions, man. That's what he told me. Yep. So yeah, putting him to sleep might have been, like I said, a little bit anticlimactic there.
Logical, however.
Yeah. Yes. So you said that the only other writer on staff was Ron Moore.
That's right.
Is that when you started kind of a writing partnership with him at that point?
Well, we struck up a friendship fairly quickly. As I was during my internship, Pillar brought on all of the seminal writers that would stay with the franchise. Jerry Taylor, Joe Menosky, Renee Echevarria. They all came in. Narain Shankar as our science advisor initially. By the time my 8-week internship was over, he had accrued a new staff.
Wow.
And that was
an amazing staff.
And that was the staff. Some writers would come and go, but that was the core staff that would remain for many, many years.
And look, I mean, I guess we might be jumping the timeline a little bit to look at where some of those folks went. Ronald D. Moore went on to do For All Mankind, Battlestar Galactica, Outlander. Joe Menosky wrote one of many people, our producer, Earl Green, his favorite episode, he told me, is Sanctuary. The first Dolly Parton episode. Joe was written by Joe Menosky, and Naren Shankar, The Expanse, is connected with that. So just folks that went on to be, again, just sci-fi royalty.
Yeah, everybody went on to pretty good careers. My first script at the end of my internship, Michael Piller decided to give me a shot, and he gave me a rewrite. But he paired me up with Ron. It was a staff writer at the time, and so I did my first script with Ron. It was an episode called Reunion, and we hit it off. And though it began. Yeah, we had a good collaboration. We didn't start collaborating in earnest. I mean, we collaborated every day because the writers were always together in the room working, but we didn't start writing scripts together in earnest until Piller moved to Deep Space Nine.
Right. And
Ron and I were able to take a more pronounced role breaking stories with Jerry, and then we started writing stuff together.
Gotcha. So that sounds like that starts your history of then being a good collaborator, because one of the things that Michael is so good about pointing out is that a lot of your scripts for the Orville are two-handers too. So how is that? How hard is it? Well, it doesn't sound like it's hard. What is that experience sharing the script or writing it? Like, who gets the brunt of the work? How did you negotiate that?
Well, the way I like to, I've been very lucky to work with incredibly talented writers. Ron Moore, and you're mentioning Andre Bormanis and David Goyer and Seth. If I'm writing alone, I'm writing alone. If I'm in a room with somebody who I trust and they trust me, it can often just be more fun. I like to man the keyboard. So I like to have some measure of control. And,
yes, totally.
But, it's someone, like Andre, we just have worked together for such a long time. And and sometimes it's just easier to bounce ideas off somebody and have another voice.
So he brings a lot of that. He came into TNG as
science advisor. Yeah,
exactly. How much of that? How much did you lean on him for that? Like, did you have a vested interest in space to begin with, or did you have to curate that interest?
I had an interest in science and astronomy, physics, quantum physics for a very long time. So I brought just enough science interest that I was able to do a decent job of the show. However, I still needed Andre to kind of tell me if I was on the right. The way I like to work, I can only speak for myself, is I would come up with an idea and then make Andre help me make it sound plausible. So if you're doing a time loop, well, most time loop, which is now a subgenre, most time loop stories don't explain why you're in a time loop. You're just in Groundhog Day. Mm-hmm. It's just magic. On Star Trek, you have to explain what the is going on. So there's the call to Andre.
Right.
And that's why an episode like Cause and Effect worked, because it had that time loop, but
it was a causality loop.
Yeah.
Causality loop sounds a little more sophisticated. And yeah, it's explained mercifully briefly. You can move on. But only in understanding it can you then you have to get out of it. That's a whole other thing. But I've had over the years just a wonderful luck collaborating with great writers and learning from each of them.
To prepare for this, I watched a panel that you did with Seth and Liz Heldens and a few other people were there as well. But you all introduced yourself as writers. And, being an executive producer of the show, I was impressed that that's how you introduce yourself and think of yourself. What was that? What, if anything, does that move from writer to co-producer to producer mean for you kind of at the beginning? And when do you realize that things are different, if they ever were?
Well, we all started as writers. I mean, Seth, also an animator. I first and foremost, I'm a writer. It's how I started. It's how I became a showrunner. Was my writing and my ability to do it well and quickly. And yet at the same time, I wasn't thinking I was doing it well and quickly. I was always afraid that I would be let go. To this day, I don't put a lot of personal items in my office. I just in case. I don't want to have that humiliating packing up the office.
Oh my
scene,
God.
So, when they told me I was going to be a co-producer, they were bumping me. I was skipping a few grades to co-producer, just as something, a nice reward. It meant a little more money. And suddenly I had a producer in my title. I wasn't expecting it, nor was I, but it was very nice. It was more of a compliment. It didn't change my role. It wasn't until I was told I was going to be running the show, running Voyager, that I'd be taking it over, which I also did not anticipate or have an ambition to do. That's when things really changed.
How so?
That's because you're now, as Jerry Taylor's, right-hand person, I had just enough authority and none of the responsibility. And when you're running the show and you're responsible for 26 scripts, and they're with their 7-day shooting schedules, so it's just nonstop. And suddenly you're responsible for every script. That every script gets written in time, so you don't shut down production, and that they have to be inventive and good every week. And that is a huge responsibility. And it's on you.
I bet. That kind of pressure just doesn't let up. It seems like it would just build more and more and more as you have to kind of tap and explore new ideas.
It's crazy. It really is. And
did you like that kind of pressure once you were in it?
Yeah, I did. It was an exciting challenge. And I enjoyed it. There came a point where there comes a point where you burn out. You can burn out a little bit.
Totally.
And 26 episodes was a lot. It was just nonstop. Just nonstop. It was.
Yeah, Shonda Rhimes talks about how it's like literally a train. The train is going to come. It's going to run you over if you don't get that script, no matter what.
To paraphrase Rod Serling, if I dropped a pencil, I lost a week.
Wow.
Like you. And
wow.
Star Trek is a particular. We didn't have. I'm not saying writing. A show like. I didn't have a continuing storylines to rely on, to pick up on. Every week had to be some new idea, and it had to be something that was high concept and engaged the characters, and maybe had a little bit of some kind of philosophical component, and the things that make Star Trek good, and that So when I look at my contributions to Star Trek, which is roughly 300 episodes.
Jeez, wow. Wow.
And with writing credit on, I think, 130 plus. Wow. There are some real stink bombs in there. Like flaming stink bombs.
We can call them filler episodes, like they do in anime. Just,
But we never set out to make a bad episode. But
how can you not everyone can be the Borg. Not everything can be.
Or even the Borg. I mean, it's like...
I'm right.
I don't think anybody... No one could really predict. There were certain scripts that were written that you were like, this is a classic. Mm. This brought me to tears, like Darmok. Speaking of Joe Menosky. It's like, oh, I just closed the script and I'm crying, and this is unlike anything I've ever read in my life. This is going to be a classic episode. Those were very rare. So, half the time you're just getting the script done. We mentioned Cause and Effect. That was an experiment. I mean, who the hell knew if people, I just assumed people would turn the channel, and some probably did.
Well, the good thing is it didn't matter if you just jump in,
that's right. You could jump in anyway.
Scenes 1 through 5, you got to see the same thing anyway.
And I would have told you that was probably going to be a failed experiment. But it turned out to be a classic for whatever reason. So some episodes, there are mediocre episodes that are mediocre and then turn out to be mediocre. But, you always try your best. But I can't articulate how intense the writing process was on that show. And we had a small staff. We never had a big staff, a small but talented staff, a very young staff.
As you took on that mantle of, moving up the ranks, and you had those young writers to work with, what did you find worked for them as far as a leadership style to get the best work out of them, to get them to, give you their best effort?
I did my best to, Jerry Taylor was one of my mentors, and she created a very safe environment for the writers. Michael Piller was a little more of a stern, kind of taskmaster. Jerry would take the time to let you do your notes and figure it out. Michael would tend to, for time's sake, take over a script and rewrite it. Mm. And I found myself in that position a lot, out of just utter necessity. I would always try to give the writers, one or two sets of notes to do take their script through, and sometimes that worked out, and sometimes it didn't. You try to create you do your best to create a fun environment, but it's not always fun. I mean, it's intense. It's really intense.
As you became showrunner on Voyager, what was sort of the mission statement of the show? Like, what was Voyager supposed to be that was different from Next Gen or different from Voyager, other than the setting?
How is Voyager different than Voyager?
I'm sorry. How is Voyager different than Next Gen or Deep Space Nine?
You're in a bad episode. So at the time, the thinking was to get away from all of the Star Trek canon and continuity that we had become very reliant on. That Deep Space Nine was utilizing by necessity as a show that was static in its premise. Not a bad thing, but it by necessity, it kind of had new people coming and going, but it wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
And so Voyager was going to be catapulted to some incredible new space with all new human actors with appliances on their foreheads who speak English.
Hey, the communicators do a lot of heavy lifting, the universal.
Because it turns out, you mentioned the Borg. Borg are great. They're, in their day, they were very cool looking. But as we found out in the movie, these are boring. These are just zombies. What are they about?
There's no motivation. I mean, there's motivation, but
their motivation, the inexplicable just relentless cold calculus of their collective and their assimilating other cultures in itself was terrifying.
It is terrifying, totally.
But it felt like in the movie it was just going to be one note. You're just shooting. They attack, you shoot. They attack, you shoot. So we created the Borg Queen. But we had a good budget on that movie, and on Voyager, it was kind of like a blessing and a curse. We suddenly had the ability to invent a new part of the galaxy with all new aliens and all new, but that's not easy. The Borg and the Klingons are really one of a kind. Most of the species on Star Trek come and go, and you forget who they were. You might remember the story, Half a Life on Next Gen, the episode Half a Life was you remember the premise.
David Ogden Stiers.
Yeah, you remember the premise, but you don't really remember the aliens.
No, and how many people are going to be able to speak Shiliak to you? There's just not a lot.
So it was a really almost impossible kind of X-Files type premise, and it was right up my alley because I wanted to do scarier episodes and stuff, and but it was also a funny premise too because they were always on the move. So if you came upon a planet, well, you were leaving it, and so it was some kind of like an inverse Deep Space Nine, where you were never in one place long enough for So,
yeah.
But the idea was throw a ship in the middle of nowhere and start with a brand new clean slate.
Well, as of the recording of right now, the main flagship podcast on the Roddenberry Podcast Network, Mission Log, is just beginning season 3 of their deep dive into Voyager, and I'm kind of going along on that ride. I've watched them all in real time in the 90s into 2000, and have rewatched the entire series one time since then, and now this will be the second rewatch that I'm going through now, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's a good exploration of close crew quarters, of people being together for a long, long time. I think it explores a lot of high concept science fiction that kind of weaves real science into it as they do that. And I know when the show began, I thought of it as much like Next Gen was an exploration of leadership. I felt like Voyager was becoming an exploration of science, and to use the same word again, which is my theme, exploration. An exploration of exploration, if you will. So I kind of thought that was what Voyager was doing did very well, and was maybe different from Next Gen.
Well, I like that assessment. It's a very kind assessment, because at the time, you got to remember about these shows, man. Even Next Gen was getting shit at the time. Like this isn't Star Trek. I mean, when I came there, it was becoming a phenomenon, but there were still people who didn't like
wanted Kirk,
and it was and Voyager, I think, it's funny in retrospect. I've heard people, some people who work on Deep Space Nine saying, "Oh, we were ignored, we were disrespected. Voyager came along, and we were like the forgotten stepson." And I'm like, God, I felt that way. I felt like Voyager never gets respect. Deep Space Nine is considered to be, a masterpiece, and we were the kind of disrespected show. So I guess we had our different points of view, because if you look at season, I think Voyager starts to improve in season 3, largely with the addition of a new character, and more ambitious, even more ambitious storytelling, fulfilling the promise of the show. But there are some very good episodes in those first 2 seasons that if you just transpose the Next Gen crew would be, considered to be really great episodes of Next Generation.
Yeah.
So it was, but there are also, a lot of you call them filler episodes. There's a lot of mediocrity too.
You'd mentioned it a little bit before in passing. Just wanted to make sure that our listeners catch that you really do have an affinity for horror. Like, is that?
And
that
I'm
correct?
out.
I heard you say
See you later.
And the question that I have were there things that you wanted to do on Voyager, darker themes, maybe things that I don't have the creativity to think of that you wanted to do with Voyager that you felt like you just couldn't within the confines of the Star Trek universe, and kind of that philosophy of optimism and idyllic future.
The philosophy. Well, first of all, that philosophy of optimism was something I adored and protected with my life. I wasn't interested in corrupting those ideals or the Federation or, like that was one of the cool things about the show. I thought there was plenty of a conflict between the characters for who they were, which were future depictions of humans. I mean, it's like, that's part of the premise. If I want regular conflict, I'll watch another show. Like I'm watching Roddenberry humans here. And it's part of the reason the show, so I've never bought that complaint.
Good.
I've never bought it from writers, and I've never bought it from viewers who complain that somehow it's boring because the humans don't succumb to the kind of petty things that we do, that they're more enlightened. That is such an important part of the premise.
Yeah, we had a conversation on our Discord the other night, which centered around this, centered around all of the decisions that folks make, all of the principles that are abandoned in the attempt to reach a goal. And this crew was trying to reach a goal. And could they, at times, compromise their principles to do that? And it looked to me that through the first 2 seasons, they bent over backwards to not compromise their goals, to live up to those principles that of Starfleet, those key humanistic principles that Star Trek espouses so much, and made things harder on themselves because it's more important to do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. So I think Voyager did do that very well.
And Janeway would bend the rules. I mean, Janeway definitely was a risk taker, and which is one of the things I liked about her. And another defining aspect of Voyager was how great Kate was. But there was no story that was too dark. I did some pretty dark stuff on there. What I wasn't able to do had nothing to do with horror, but more had to do with storytelling, which is I wanted to do when we first were conceiving the idea Year of Hell, I wanted to do a Year of Hell, meaning a season of hell. So that 2-part episode was going initially, very, very, very briefly, I had pitched as a season, and it was shot down because TV didn't do that. Soap operas did that during the daytime, and 24, which filmed in Chatsworth, they did that.
Which, to be fair, let's just listen. The first job I did was in Chatsworth, and I was advertising sex products.
You might have saw her getting coffee in the morning.
The 24 stages were in an old pencil factory, but right next door was a sex toy factory that was still in business, was still manufacturing those things. Chatsworth is a really strange place. But anyway,
it is a really strange place, and for another podcast, I'm sure.
Yeah, but so there, I would run up against some constraints, and even my wanting to do more continuous storylines ultimately did manifested as doing a more 2-part mini movies.
Right.
They let me do that. So, I wanted to experiment a little more with the format, and would have had I been allowed to. But, it's just the reality of the show. It was an expensive show to make, and they needed to sell it. And you're not going to see a show, to my knowledge, like 24 in syndication a lot, because they're not modular enough.
And you can't just jump in and out for one episode. And honestly, I did have to make a concerted effort when Voyager was being shown in real time, when I had missed a couple of episodes later on, because so much had happened. There was enough of a story arc, even in an episodic show, that it was tough. Like I had to watch them. I had to make sure I caught them all when they were ran during the summer.
So that to some degree contradicts one of the ongoing complaints about Voyager that I would get at the time, which was the reset button. Oh, the dreaded reset button, which to me was, you mean an ending to a story? Is that the reset button you're talking about? Because if this story had no ending, you'd be pissed.
Yeah.
But that was kind of a complaint. Like, there are no repercussions. Something happens and everyone forgets about it the next week. And that was a common complaint. Now, it's interesting to hear you say something that contradicts that.
Yeah, at one point I tuned in. I'm like, where'd this Delta Flyer come from? I don't remember that, and I had to kind of go back and catch those episodes where Tom made the Delta Flyer. I want to just chat real quick, because we're going to be in a position where we're going to be talking all night.
We haven't even talked about the Orville yet.
No.
Wait, what's the Orville?
And we'll get there in just a second, but I did want to throw this out there real quick, just from the movies. You and Ronald D. Moore, correct me if I'm wrong, wrote All Good Things together, wrote Generations together, and wrote First Contact together. And Montana featured prominently in First Contact. And I don't know if you're watching any of the newer Star Trek, but Star Trek Lower Decks, there is now a First Contact theme park in Bozeman, Montana, that I think you can personally feel responsible for. And it's really cool if you have not checked out that Lower Decks episode.
I have seen that show, and it's a wonderful show. In Cause and Effect, the USS Bozeman, there's a lot of Montana reference. I was born in Bozeman, Montana. In terms of First Contact, it seemed like a good place where First Contact would take place, and we had a nuclear missile silo storyline. In the news now, with the Chinese spy balloon floating over that area, floating over Billings.
Prescient.
They are. I think they're trying to prevent the birth of Zephyr Cochrane.
And we did film at an actual nuclear missile silo. That's a real decommissioned warhead. It was in Arizona.
It was an amazing film, and those three stories right there. Best of Both Worlds. All Good Things, Generations, and First Contact. Man, what a contribution to Star Trek, just with those three projects right there.
Generations. Many would that was the shaky.
Yeah, haters gonna hate, man. What are you gonna do? I enjoyed Generations. I did not know until 20 years later I was not supposed to like it. Was flying with a guy who I adore flying with. He's actually a sci-fi author. His name's Ryan Crowder, great guy. But he was like, "No, you're not supposed to like Generations." I was like, "Well, color me wrong, then, man. I don't know what to tell you." It had
depends on how old you were when you saw it.
I saw it in the movie theater.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you.
But how old were you?
A baby.
So
I was young.
I like it. I'm a big James Bond fan, and I'm a James Bond fan. In fact, you may see my Star Trek posters, but on this side of the wall are my James Bond posters.
I just got a DB5 coffee table book from my son for Christmas.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, I think I know that book. It's kind of like the Bond pictures. I loved The Spy Who Loved Me because it was the first one I saw.
Right.
I was a kid. It blew me away. It was so cool. I still love it. I think it's a great Bond picture. Most Bond fans would say it's terrible. That's a terrible movie. But it was my movie. It was mine. And a lot of people saw Generations, and that was their first Star Trek movie. Now, I was lucky enough that the first Star Trek movie I saw was the first Star Trek movie, which is a great movie.
It is even better now with the 4K restoration and the updated sound and voiceover. It's really, really, really tightened that film up a lot.
Yeah, no, I know. I know some people who worked on the restoration. A lot of work went into that.
So just real quick, because we do want to get to the Orville at some point, but man, I'm enjoying this conversation. You talked about sort of the folks you were writing with and working with at Next Gen. You mentioned Joe Menosky, and he came along for the ride. Marvin Rush came along for the ride. At Enterprise, David A. Goodman joined the writing staff at some point. Seth MacFarlane was on the show.
That's how I met Seth, by the way.
Okay. Good, excellent. Playing Ensign Rivers, if I remember right, and
Wait, who?
no, and I think that was Seth's character was called Ensign Rivers.
I didn't know his character. I didn't know his character.
Ensign Rivers. Okay. And if you talk to Connor Trenier about it, all he did was yell at him the whole time. He's like, all I got to do was yell at him for the 2 times. But you could really see that group really kind of move on to the Orville. So Enterprise, again, every series of Star Trek is going to be somebody's favorite and somebody's least favorite. Every episode is going to be somebody's favorite and somebody's least favorite. I love Enterprise. I love the visual on it. I love the fact that it's more grounded sci-fi. It kind of ties me into things like the space race and the right stuff and things like that. First Flight, I think, is one of my favorite episodes of television of all time. What do you think worked on Enterprise? What didn't? It's
so great to finally meet a fan of the show.
Hey!
You haven't had anyone come up to you at Comic-Con and be like, I love this.
But that's another thing. This show is it's killing it now on streaming.
Well, I've talked a lot about it over the years. There's been a lot of self-analysis and fan analysis, and some of my memories may be inaccurate, but it was the things that worked in it were the things that Rick and I originally were aiming for, like a show a little closer to today in sensibilities. The people are a little more recognizable. We wanted to do a show that was, we didn't even want the Enterprise to launch right away. Like, it was going to be under construction, and we were going to build our way to the launch of the ship. The studio really hated the idea of doing a prequel at all, and which is why we kind of put in a science fiction concept I'd been noodling for a few years about a temporal Cold War. So we put in kind of a futuristic element in there, which never quite worked. That's one of the things I think didn't work. But I think it had a good cast. It had a cool looking ship, and maybe my favorite thing, which ended up being controversial to my surprise, was the way the Vulcans played a role. To me, this was kind of a sequel to First Contact. I mean, that was our touchstone. This took place not long, after First Contact, and the Vulcans were like, well, maybe our relationship back then with the Vulcans was more rocky. Like, they were like, these people are not ready. They're ready, but they're not ready. And they're going to bring a lot of trouble upon themselves if we don't babysit them. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic, and to put a captain into, to chafe under. And I liked that. The idea of doing a prequel was relatively new. I mean, the Star Wars movie had just done it. And it just seemed like a fresh idea, And so some of it worked, some of it didn't. The theme song did not work. It was not what we had in there as a temp was a U2 song, and it was super cool. And then, certain things that were going to be cool didn't turn out to be cool, and some things did. What can I say?
Again, I think that show is aging pretty well, and I think it's found a new audience in streaming. Well, and especially with that.
It's interesting. One the guy I work with is a huge Next Generation and Voyager fan. His parents were Next Gen fans. They almost named him John Luke. They named him Joe, but they almost named him Jean Luc, which I find hilarious. But he like literally never seen Enterprise because it just was.
I didn't know it existed, honestly, until I started doing this podcast.
So it's like I'm like, Joe, you've got 100 episodes of Star Trek you've never seen, and it's Star Trek made by the same people who you made the Star Trek you already like. Like, you should watch the show. You'll probably like it. So to people who haven't seen it, it's worth checking out.
It really is, and I don't mind the theme song at all. In fact, when I do rewatch the show, if my wife's watching along with me, she will not let me hit the skip intro button on that. She will she'll stab me with a fork.
What I do like is the main credit titles or the imagery.
Very much so.
Is very much just captures the kind of right stuff, exploration, vessels of exploration vibe. In fact, I have, you probably can't see it, it's sitting in a corner right by the Voyager chair.
Okay.
The different Enterprise ship drawings hanging in Archer's ready room is over there.
Against the between the bookshelf and the window.
Yep.
That's a gorgeous little corner.
It's too big and heavy. I can't figure out a place to hang it, but
if you need somebody to take it off your hands, I can get you an airline discount on shipping things cargo.
Jeez, not so subtle, Mike. Not so subtle.
Mission Log: The Orville is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Technical production by the indestructible Earl Green. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is podcasts.roddenberry.com.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.